3:42 in the morning, August 23, 2025. Suddenly, 70 armed boats emerged from the darkness, launching a relentless attack aimed directly at the USNS Liberty Star, a supply ship carrying fuel and ammunition, the vital lifeline of a U.S. Navy carrier strike group. This was not just a surprise attack. It was a bold test of probing America's defensive capabilities on a strategic maritime route. The enemy believed they could encircle, overwhelm, and defeat the ship. But what unfolded next was not merely defense. It was a striking lesson in modern warfare resonating across oceans and global military demand for, could a logistics ship not designed for combat withstand a ferocious assault? And what happened when the ship came under attack? Let's uncover the truth. Don't take your eyes off the screen before the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on this event. At 3:42 a.m. on August 20th, 2025, the radar screen on the bridge of the USNS Liberty Star suddenly lit up with a series of unusual signals at first, resembling interference or a technical glitch caused by strong winds or large waves. But within just a few seconds, all doubt vanished as the bright spots did not disappear. Instead, they formed into dozens of small, fast-moving targets, skimming the water's surface like phantoms rushing through the night. Their speed increased in a synchronized rhythm, as if controlled by a meticulous plan. The radar operator immediately reported his voice, low and urgent. This isn't interference. It's an organized approach. The bridge commander spun towards the screen, his gaze hardening as the confirmation appeared. The high-speed boats were racing toward the vessel from multiple directions at once. No lights, no radio signals, no identification codes. In those brief seconds, the atmosphere aboard the Liberty Star transformed completely from the slow, steady rhythm of a supply ship tasked with transporting fuel, ammunition, and essential supplies to support the carrier strike group into a situation of extreme tension. The general quarters alarm blared its sharp sound, cutting through the darkness, followed by the pounding footsteps of the crew, civilian engineers, medical staff, and sailors accustomed to logistics now scrambled to emergency defensive positions. At the point, 5 Zero-caliber machine guns mounted on both sides of the ship. Gunners quickly loaded ammunition, checking their barrels with focused hands, ready to face the unexpected situation. Below, deck engineering teams rushed to seal watertight doors and secure the fuel. Holds as a single mistake could endanger the multi-million-dollar vessel carrying thousands of tons of fuel. On the bridge, the captain of the Liberty Star contacted the Fifth Fleet for instructions and issued a warning broadcast over the loudspeaker in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and Somali, hoping the approaching force would reconsider. But the only response was the roar of engines and the glint of light from the advancing boats. Through the observation windows, officers could see that many of the boats were carrying climbing ladders. Some had crude machine gun mounts and a few carried plastic barrels, the signs of a dangerous assault. Everyone on board remembered the weekly security briefings. Never underestimate simple wooden boats. They can pose a significant threat. The Liberty Star was not a warship nor an aircraft carrier with hundreds of Marines. It was merely a logistical link in the Navy's operational chain. But tonight, it would have to defend itself as its nearest escort. The destroyer USS Mason was nearly an hour away. In the pitch black of the sea, the 70 boats advanced, splitting into 3 groups to surround the vessel and closing the distance. 2,000 Waked 12500 Dwast. On deck, the gunners stood ready at their posts, awaiting the official order to engage. Each passing second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, one boat accelerated ahead of the others, its engine roaring as it charged straight for the Liberty Star's hull. The distance shrank 900 YD 600 400. The radar flashed an urgent warning. In that moment, the entire ship was gripped by extreme tension, fully aware that a collision could cause catastrophic damage. But the order to engage still hadn't come from the chain of command, leaving every eye on the bridge glued to the screens, awaiting a critical decision. Music, 45 a.m., the order to fire finally came, 15 seconds late. But for the crew on the deck of the Liberty Star, it felt like a lifetime. The message cleared to engage flashed on the communications screen. The moment the captain gave the command fire, The .050 caliber machine gun on the starboard side immediately opened up. Bright tracer rounds tore through the darkness, shattering the silence with a ferocious roar. In an instant, the lead boat erupted in flames, its bow disintegrating as debris flew everywhere. In a small explosion, flames spread across the water's surface, but the remaining boats didn't stop. A dozen more charged into firing range. The machine guns on both sides of the ship fired continuously, their tracer rounds streaking through the air. As-spent casings clattered onto the deck. The smell of gunpowder mingled with the Zia air. The boats packed with men, some carrying heavy weapons, returned fire with volleys that zipped past the ship sparks, erupting where bullets struck steel. The CIW system previously on standby was manually active. Its turret swiveled rapidly, locking onto a target. A mechanical whine filled the air as a stream of rounds was unleashed, ripping directly into a boat laden with fuel. The resulting explosion created a massive pillar of light, illuminating the sea like a flash of lightning. Debris rained down. That was the first target destroyed. But no one had time to pause as dozens of other boats pressed the attack. Below deck, alarms blared continuously. Engineering teams scrambled to seal off compartment smoke seeping in after a round struck the outer deck and detonated, fortunately missing the main fuel tanks. On deck, the situation had reached a fever pitch. One boat slipped through the hail of gunfire, pulling alongside the port side and throwing grappling hooks. 4 figures scrambled onto the deck, one swinging a bladed weapon, another firing a pistol. Close quarters combat erupted instantly. A civilian mariner used a fire extinguisher to drive back an attacker getting grazed on the shoulder, but creating an opening for a Navy sailor tow charge forward, using his M4 rifle to neutralize the breach. Smoke fire, gunfire, and screams blended together, becoming indistinguishable from the roar of boat engines and the whine of passing bullets. The first wave felt endless. With each passing minute, more boats were destroyed, but sailors were also being hit. 5 crew members were struck by bullets or shrapnel. One critically wounded in the chest was dragged inside by his shipmates for emergency first aid. Flames from a destroyed boat licked up the side of the hull, forcing a firefighting team to battle the blaze while dodging incoming fire. Every magazine change was a tense moment for the gunners, knowing a few seconds' delay could allow the enemy to close in. The captain yelled over the intercom, "Engage targets under 700 YD, only conserve ammunition." But it was a hard command to follow in the chaos. The gunners kept firing relentlessly, the sound of their own weapons, the only thing convincing them they still had a chance. As the 12th boat was destroyed, the first wave finally began to recede. But it was only a temporary lull. Out on the water, at least 20 other boats were still circling, moving in wide arcs, probing for a weakness. The surviving boats from the initial assault didn't retreat. Instead, they held their positions, providing support for their comrades behind them. Music. Everyone on the Liberty Star knew this was just the beginning. The deck was now littered with spent casings, thick with gunpowder smoke, scarred by scorched steel, and heavy with the acrid smell of metal. A young engineer slumped on a stairwell, his hands trembling, a gash on his forehead, bleeding, his gaze fixed on a blackened hole in the hull. But an urgent shout for more ammunition from a gunner snapped him back to reality, and he staggered to his feet to haul another ammo can up to the deck. Everyone understood that to stop was to lose the ship. Music. In the distance, the radar picked up new contacts, moving slowly but deliberately, as if the first wave had just been approached. A tense minute of silence passed before the next storm would hit. The Liberty Star had survived the first 18 minutes, but the cost was clear. 5 wounded, multiple external compartments damaged, a section of the deck scorched, and the crew's morale pushed to its limit. As the distant boats began to accelerate, gathering into groups of 3 and 4, their engines roaring in the night, everyone realized the first wave hadn't ended. It was escalating into a much larger assault. Before the flames on the destroyed drifting boats had even died out, the next wave hit. This was no longer a probe, but a direct, coordinated assault. On the radar, 6 boats broke from the formation, charging at full speed toward the Liberty Star's port side, their white wakes trailing behind them. The gunner's deck yelled over the radio, contacts closing on the port side standby to engage. The captain barely had time to redirect fire before the 50 caliber guns roared to life again. Streaks of tracers cut through the darkness. 2 boats exploded in a brilliant shower of sparks, sending debris skipping across the water. But the remaining 4 pressed on undeterred. One of them slammed into the ship amidships with a gut-wrenching screech of twisting steel. Smoke and fire erupted from the impact as the enemy threw up ladders and grappling hooks swarming onto the deck through the thick smoke. The boarding alarm echoed through the ship, ratcheting the tension to its breaking point. In the darkness, the fight was no longer just about guns. It was about bladed weapons, firefighting tools, and bare hands. 2 security sailors rushed to the breach point using their M4s to drop the first man who climbed over the railing, but 3 others threw smoke devices. A thick cloud instantly obscuring that corner of the deck. Within the choking smoke, sporadic gunfire rang out, punctuated by screams. A young sailor went down with a shoulder wound, blood soaking his uniform. His shipmate immediately used a fire extinguisher to drive back an attacker, the heavy thud of the impact echoing on the deck. On the other side of Themelee, a 25-year-old engine tech using a heavy wrench smashed a climbing ladder apart, sending 2 attackers plunging into the dark sea below. Comment the word 1 to learn what happened in that moment. How did the United States Navy respond to a threat that could have sparked global conflict? Music. Another boat got within 50 meters before concentrated fire tore it apart in a brilliant fireball, but not before 2 attackers managed to hurl incendiaries at the ship. One ignited against the hull, the flames racing up a bundle of electrical cables. An emergency fire team rushed in, spraying foam to suppress the blaze. The resulting steam and smoke, sending sailors into choking fits. Below deck, the pressure was just as intense. A piece of shrapnel had pierced the hull, missing a main fuel tank by mere feet. Engineers, slick with sweat and oil, scrambled to reinforce the breach. Every rivet hammered into place, every steel plate secured, was a desperate effort to save the ship. "If this gives way, we're all done for," one engineer panted. His hands trembling as tightened a bolt. Music. Time seemed to stand still, leaving only the sound of bullets striking steel and screams, muffled by smoke and dust. On deck, the chaos piled on. An attacker leaped over the railing, weapon in hand, but was tackled by a security sailor before he could make a move. The 2 grappled on the deck littered with spent casings, gunshots ringing out until a single well-aimed shot ended the threat. Music. No one had time to breathe. The radar sounded another warning. From then northeast, about 15 more boats appeared, spreading out in a formation that tightened the encirclement. It was clear now. This was no ordinary band of pirates. The coordination, the formations, and the jammed radio signals all pointed to a trained and organized force. On the bridge, the captain's voice was grim. "These are military tactics, not some random act." But whatever it was, the sailors and security teams on deck had only what was at hand. Machine guns M4 as a few smoke devices and their own survival instincts. As another round exploded, shrapnel tore into the smokestack and the entire ship shuddered. Thick black smoke engulfed half the vessel. The sounds of shouting cries for help and blaring alarms blended into one. A boat slammed into the starboard side and 6 figures leaped aboard, armed with blades and clubs, one of them cornering a sailor. But instantly, 3 security sailors burst out from a nearby compartment. Gunfire erupted. Smoke and dust filled the air as the boarders were driven back and the sailor was pulled to safety, his face pale with shock. Music. The close-quarters battle raged for nearly half an hour. The deck became a battlefield strewn with debris from burning boats scarred by scorch marks and with fires flickering along the railings as the crew fought desperately to repel wave after wave. But it was clear they were reaching their breaking point. Suddenly, the radar picked up a strong contact from the southeast. A familiaricon lit up the screen, igniting a surge of hope on the bridge. The destroyer USS Mason was inbound, cutting through the waves at high speed. A sailor yelled into the radio, "Mason's on the way!" Hold on for a few more minutes. Amid the explosions, smoke, and sea spray, a flicker of hope appeared on the horizon. The close-quarters battle was still raging, but everyone knew the Mason's arrival was a game-changer. The eastern sky began to glow with the faint light of dawn as the massive silhouette of the USS Mason appeared, tearing through the darkness. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer charged forward its bow, carving a deep wake as it headed straight for the Liberty Star, now wreathed in smoke and flame. On the Liberty Star's CIC radar, the Mason's icon glowed like a beacon, the hope the crew had clung to for 40 agonizing minutes. A few suppressed cheers broke out on the bridge, but they were quickly silenced. The fight wasn't over. The remaining boats didn't retreat. They tightened their formation, and from the northeast, new contacts began to appear on the screen. Music. The Mason acted immediately. As it came into range, its combat system went fully active, its guns and missile launchers coming online. The first shot from the 5-in Mark 45 naval gun boomed across the water, a Nair-burst shell that screamed through the air and detonated just over a cluster of boats. The blast created a massive shockwave, capsizing several of the small vessels and throwing their occupants into the sea. The effect was immediate. Some of the boats broke off in a panic, but many more pressed on with grim determination. The Mason's CIWs spun to life its 20mm tungsten rounds, letting out a terrifying shriek as they formed a dense wall of fire shredding two of Thericlus' boats. There was a flash of light, a spray of debris, and a rising plume of black smoke overhead. 2 Puma UAVs were launched, streaming real-time thermal and optical imagery. In the CIC, every hostile boat was tagged, moving, neutralized, or evading. Electronic warfare systems jammed the enemy's communications, severing their coordination. But then a surprise emerged from the group of 10 new boats. 2 of them began emitting encrypted radio signals, not on common frequencies, but in military-grade pulse bursts. Music. The Mason CIC fell silent for a moment. This was the confirmation. They weren't just pirates. They were organized, trained, and possibly backed by a state-level power. "They're testing our defenses," the tactical action officer concluded. Immediately, the executive officer ordered full electronic countermeasures to be deployed to neutralize the signal, son the water. The once organized boat formation fell into chaos. Some collided with each other, others lost control, their speeds dropping significantly. The Mason capitalized on the opportunity, bringing its Mark 38 Mod 3 autoc cannons to bear. 25mm rounds tore across the waves, the near-miss explosions alone powerful enough to capsize the boats. 3 more vessels were swamped and sank quickly, sending up geysers of water. Music. On the deck of the Liberty Star, the crew seemed to find a second wind, shouting encouragement, reloading and providing covering fire as the Mason led the engagement with overwhelming force. One boat tried to swing wide, aiming for the Liberty Star's bow, but the Mason's CIWs locked on, and the burst of round shit hit dead center. The explosion threw shrapnel onto the steel deck. The sight left many sailors in awe, but it also hardened their resolve. They were not alone anymore. The battle raged for another half hour, with each wave beaten back by the combined firepower of the 2 ships. However, the attackers' persistence suggested a larger purpose. They weren't trying to capture the vessel for ransom. They were prolonging the engagement, testing the U.S. Navy's response. The proof came when a boarding party from the Mason searched one of the intact boats, recovering an encrypted radio. NATO maps marked with warship symbols and a handwritten command log. The intelligence officer's voice was grim. This wasn't piracy. This was a probe disguised as an attack. When the last gunshot faded, the Red Sea was left with black smoke, shimmering oil slicks, and the wreckage of burning boats. Aboard the Liberty Star, the wounded were being moved to the medical bay as smoke smoldered along the hull. On the Mason, the CIC remained on high alert. Officers relayed their report to the 5th Fleet. Attack repelled. 70 hostile vessels neutralized numerous assailants, killed several, captured critical intelligence, recovered. But even as the report went out, everyone knew this was just the beginning. The force behind it all remained in the shadows with far more unsettling intentions. On the deck of the Liberty Star, sailors stood shoulder to shoulder, looking toward the Mason with eyes full of gratitude and haunted exhaustion, realizing this night was more than just an attack. It was a message. and that message had been delivered in smoke fire and the resolve of 70 boats sent to test the might of the U.S. Navy. The battle was over, but the chilling questions lingered, making it impossible for anyone to feel a true sense of relief. In the distant darkness, another plan could already be taking shape. The dawn of August 25th cast a heavy light over the Red Sea. The water shimmered with oil slicks, charred wood, and the floating wreckage of boats. There were no more gunshots, no more roaring engines, only the steady lapping of waves against a scorched hull. On the deck of the Liberty Star, sailors leaned against the railings, their faces smudged with soot and their clothes stained, their eyes hollow with exhaustion, but still vigilant. Medics moved with urgency, bandaging wounds, treating burns, and stabilizing the injured. Many of the survivors now stared silently out at the sea, where shipmates had fallen to keep the vessel safe. Aboard the USS Mason, the CIC was aglow with monitors as intelligence officers analyzed the recovered data. The NATO maps, the encrypted radio, the intercepted military-grade signals. The conclusion silenced the room. This had not been a random act. It was an organized test using pirates as a cover to probe the U.S. Navy's response and send a message of defiance. The Mason's captain reported to Fifth Fleet. This was a reconnaissance in force disguised. It cannot be taken lightly. The Liberty Star was still afloat, but her decks were scarred by scorch marks. Her compartments breached, her cabling shredded, and the acrid smell of hot metal hung in the passageways. Engineering teams began assessing the hull, cataloging every dent and rupture, tallying the price of survival. There were no cheers of victory. A heavy silence settled over them. They knew the true enemy had not yet revealed itself, and that what had just happened was only the prelude to a much greater challenge. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the two ships in its brilliant golden light, sailors stood in formation on the decks, their eyes firm, their silence deep. Their resolve unbroken. They had faced 70 boats, dozens of gunmen, fire and smoke, and they had held the line. But deep down, everyone realized that modern warfare had changed. The line between logistics and the front line had been erased, and nowhere was truly safe. That day left an unmistakable message. Any ship flying the American flag, even a supply vessel, could be considered a target. And an attack at sea, even under the guise of piracy, could be a probe from a power operating in the shadows. The story of the August 2025 attack in the Red Sea is not just a battle against 70 armed boats. It is a vivid testament to the nature of modern warfare. The details of the engagement are cause for reflection. A supply ship like the Liberty Star, built for logistics, was forced to become a fortress fighting off waves of attackers with Aero 50 caliber machine guns, manually operated CIWs, and brave civilian mariners who used fire, extinguishers, and tools to repel borders. This illustrates that the line between logistics and combat has blurred, and that every ship flying the American flag must be ready for a fight. The timely arrival of the USS Mason weighs the turning point, not only because of its 5-in-gun and overwhelming CIWS firepower, but because of its electronic warfare capabilities, which exposed the truth. Behind the facade of piracy was an organized force equipped with encrypted radios and NATO maps. This was not an attack for ransom. It was a probe designed to test the U.S. Navy's response. The lesson for America is clear. National security is defended not just at its borders, but on distant sea lanes where sailors face daily threats to maintain commerce and project national power. For the nation's leaders, it is a reminder of the need for greater investment in maritime security and enhanced protection for supply vessels, the very lifeblood of naval strength. The 2025 battle in the Red Sea is a stark warning about modern warfare. The line between logistics and combat has vanished. The USNS Liberty Star, a supply ship, became a fortress against 70 armed boats, proving that any American vessel can be a target. The bravery of the crew, both civilian and military, coupled with the timely intervention of the USS Mason, underscores that national security depends on readiness and coordination. Investment in maritime security is essential to protect the Navy's lifeblood. Music. We can be proud that the United States military from its sailors to its combat officers, has held the stars and stripes high through a storm of fire and blood moving to the world. That any enemy who challenges America will face nothing but smoke, fire, and defeat. The message to those who lurk in the shadows is crystal clear. America does not yield. We were, are, and always will be ready to respond with the full might of a superpower. Thank you for watching this story of smoke, fire, and the courage of the United States Navy in the battle for the Red Sea. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next compelling analysis.